wrote down a pretty big, kind of extensive pro-con list of The Cursed Child, mostly cons. I think you all know why. I'm going to try and go into detail. Some of these notes are just pure emotional thoughts. Before I started reading The Cursed Child, I hadn't really thought of anything that I wanted out of the book. I didn't have any expectations. I think in the back of my mind I was just gonna accept it for what it was, because it is obviously based on a play, so I needed to kind of like not get my hopes up. But I think kind of in the back of my mind I subconsciously had like high hopes. First, straight off the bat, the first thing that I thought about was the cover. I do not really like this cover. I'm just not a huge fan. It just doesn't scream Harry Potter. I mean, compared to the artwork of the original US edition, it's just like no comparison. Although I do like the back of the cover where it says the 8th story, 19 years later. I do actually like that. It's just the front cover that I'm just not fond of. Okay, now to the pro-con list. I'm going to start out with the pros. First thing on the pro-con list, I have the Hermione-Ron moments. I did like the moments between Ron and Hermione. Obviously, I was kind of weirded out by the part about Hermione and Albus. I mean, obviously that's not like Hermione Ron, so I can just like shove it and forget about it. I really liked like the alternate universe dynamic between Hermione and Ron, specifically in like the Voldemort Reign universe. I liked that. It was decent. Second thing on my pro list, the Albus Scorpius friendship. Obviously, I don't know what else to say about that, just that I liked their friendship. Had a lot to do with kind of like the rivalry between Harry and Draco, and how their sons are just like best friends. I like that. Third thing on the pro list, good Slytherin representation. Yes, for once. And I've always hated how like it's represented as like the evil of Hogwarts, because not everyone who's in Slytherin is evil. It shouldn't be that way. And I like that that story kind of addressed it, especially with Albus being sorted into Slytherin. I liked it. The next thing I wrote was time travel. I know time travel stories is like really fan fiction-y because it's something that a lot of Harry Potter fan fiction is about, but I really liked the time travel. I just liked it. I thought it was entertaining more than anything else. Next thing on the pro list, I wrote it down right here. It says word for word, the Hermione Draco moments. So sue me. I liked it. You know the parts I'm talking about. Harry gets some closure about his parents' death. So I kind of like the part at the very end where Harry kind of gets to see the setting, the moment, the day where he faced off Voldemort for the first time and his parents died for him. And I think that really helped him get some closure. Really helped him like kind of like feel closer to his parents, understand what they went through, and kind of help him as a parent as well. The next thing I wrote down was the baby blanket scene made me cry. And it did make me cry. And that was like one of the first scenes that I kind of like got to me. And it was super emotional. It was really good. I liked it. That scene was like the only scene in this story that made me cry. Draco is a good parent. I liked this because he's not abusive like his father. I think he kind of like learned from his father. And he's trying to look out for his son Scorpius, doing the best he can to just watch out for his son's welfare in every way. And I think that's like completely the opposite of Harry, because Harry is kind of oblivious and doesn't seem to really. The next thing I put on my pro list is a quote that I really liked. I think it's probably my favorite quote from the whole story. It's said by Scorpius when he's talking to his father, and it says, "The Malfoys, the family you can always rely on to make the world a murkier place." I really liked that. I thought it was super funny. The next thing I put on my pro list is Ron, Ginny, and Scorpius. I really like those characters. Ron stayed in character, just seemed like himself throughout the whole thing. Ginny, good mom, good wife, good mother, overall good character. Was strong, independent, forceful, just a good person. Scorpius, the voice of reason against Albus, who's like insane. The next thing on my pro list is that I really liked seeing the world in which Voldemort is like the leader. Not because I like Voldemort or anything, but because I liked seeing this alternate reality, seeing like the what if of the wizarding world and how awful it would be. I just thought it was interesting and I really liked that. Okay, next to the con list, everything I did not like about The Cursed Child. As you'll notice, it's quite a bit longer than the pro list, and I didn't even put everything on the con list that I wanted to. I stopped after like half a page. First thing, Harry Potter out of character. Harry just wasn't himself in the story, and I did not like that. He was just this like crazy insane father. It was just so weird and just like forceful and just awful to like McGonagall and to his son. Just doesn't seem like the person that Harry would grow up to be. I didn't like how the characters called like former teachers by their first name, like they're like first name basis friends with all these like former teachers that they had. Just didn't make sense. I feel like they would still call them by like professor or their last names. I don't know. I didn't like how they ended the relationship between Scorpius and Albus. I mean, it just made sense throughout the whole book. If you've read it, you know what I mean. And then at the end, like, Scorpius just is suddenly, like, with Rose. The next thing I put on my con list was Harry Potter treating McGonagall. He treated McGonagall awfully. McGonagall is stronger than that, and I think she would have stood up to Harry. Harry has a ton of respect for Professor McGonagall. I don't understand why he was treating her that way, talking to her like that, kind of trying to force her to just like spy on his son, and it was just awful. And I know McGonagall, and I know she would have stood up against Harry. I just didn't like that scene. I didn't like Harry being that way. No, I didn't like it. Next thing I wrote was that Harry was being an insane dad, which I know I've talked about in the characterization of Harry, but he was just an awful dad. He didn't seem to care about Albus as a person. I mean, he just didn't seem like he cared about Albus as a person, just cared obviously about his well-being, but just didn't seem like he wanted to get to know his son and get to know what he was thinking, or even try and understand like how he felt about being placed into Slytherin. A big thing that I had issues with was Voldemort having a child with Bellatrix. Most of all, just Voldemort having a child in general just didn't make sense. I mean, he's Voldemort. I don't think he's thinking about having an heir because, I mean, he's trying to be immortal. He thinks he's gonna live forever. It's not like him trying to make sure that a part of him is moving on through an heir. Just doesn't make sense. Second of all, I don't like it because it doesn't really make sense. I mean, Voldemort doesn't even have a full soul, so it just doesn't make sense that he would just have that as a goal. I mean, someone who doesn't have a full soul wouldn't feel that desire, feel that even type of desire to have their child, yet let alone a relationship with one of his followers. It just, I don't know how to explain it. I just didn't like it. It didn't make sense. I feel like Delphi could have easily just been like some obsessed follower instead of a child. I just didn't see the need. The next thing I didn't really like was the time turners. I feel like the time turners were just brought back for the sake of the story because it had to do with time travel. They just brought him back way too easily. The next thing I wrote was that Harry is off the rails insane, which he is. I think that's like the thing I hated the most about the story, and I've written it down like 5 different times in this con list that Harry is just not Harry. I don't like it. He's not the Harry I imagined when I read the whole series of the Harry Potter series, and I don't think that this Harry is who Harry Potter would grow up to be. Albus, I didn't like how he was just like an awful child. He just doesn't have any care for anyone. I mean, that someone who has that much hate for his father just doesn't make sense to me. He's grown up with Harry as his dad for like his whole life, so I feel like he would at least in part understand a little bit about Harry and what he went through. One thing I didn't like was that it read like a fan fiction. I've read a ton of fan fiction, especially Harry Potter fan fiction, and that's exactly what this read like. I know it's a play and that like the characters are exaggerated for a reason so that they'll come off all great on stage. Fan fiction. It's real. The next thing I put on my con list was Delphi, just in general. When she first came into the story, I knew that she was awful. I knew that I didn't like her, that she was just going to be some weird character to progress the plot, because it didn't make sense. She's just some weird random original character. First of all, she was Voldemort's child. She could have easily just been like a super fangirl, a fanatic of Voldemort, which was why she was like being crazy. So it just didn't make sense to me why there was a need to make her Voldemort's child. Second of all, I didn't like how Albus and Scorpius easily accepted her into their friend group. I mean, that just didn't make sense how easily they accepted her. The last thing I put on my con list was that I didn't like that they put such a huge deal about house sortings. At Hogwarts, I feel like all 4 houses are important. They all have good qualities. They all have good people in general. I mean, I feel like Voldemort is just like some crazy, insane thing that happened. People in Slytherin can still be good people, and I feel like Harry forgets that for some reason, even though the scene at the train happened. I feel like everybody put too much emphasis on Albus getting sorted into Slytherin and made a huge deal, and it's probably one of the reasons. Okay, so I feel like there's a lot more I could say about Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, but right now I think that's all I'm gonna talk about. I know there's a ton of stuff that was like wrong with the story timeline wise, but I feel like I could make a whole nother video about like each of those individually, which I might, but that was just mostly talking about the initial thoughts I had on the story after writing my pro-con list, so I hope you enjoyed. Overall, I thought it was a really interesting story. I'm having a hard time accepting it as canon because I have a lot of issues with it. I did think it was enjoyable to read. I know that a lot of people worked very hard on it, and I accept that. And I know that the play is probably amazing. I've heard a ton of amazing things about it from a lot of different people. In general, a good story compared to the original Harry Potter series. Questionable. Reading it as a standalone story, it's pretty decent. I love a good time travel story. I enjoyed reading it. I read it really quickly on the first day it came out. I'll probably read it again just to kind of compare it to my initial thoughts. Maybe I'll use this as a thumbnail.